evening was the most important responsibility that I'd been ordered to undertake in the 7 months I've been volunteering for the NGO I work for. That night, we were fundraising to provide winter clothing for some of our world's most vulnerable people, fleeing unimaginable horror, and now finding themselves trapped on the weather-beaten archipelagos of the Aegean Sea. And I was put in charge of hosting the Celebrity Charity Slave Auction that takes place at our annual gala dinner. This year, the celebrities participating were as follows: broadcaster Jon Snow, legendary activist Tariq Ali, and former parliamentarian Rory Stewart OBE. The venue would be Tarablus al-Gharb, an upmarket Libyan restaurant that boasts a well-deserved reputation for excellence. The atmosphere on the night was electric. The lone moment of silence was as the lavish feast of couscous and roast mutton was carried out on an enormous silver dish by an army of Libyan chefs, which was immediately followed by thunderous applause. The guests largely consisted of career journalists, award-winning cultural figures, and wealthy spinsters hoping to snap up a prize celebrity specimen at the charity slave auction. Spirits were high, and the guests were abuzz with conversation. Every seat at every table had been filled, apart from the largest booking, directly in front of the stage, that had been reserved for 12 under the name Abu Bassam, whom I had been told was a wealthy Emirati sheikh and well-known big spender. The arrangement had been that after dinner had been cleared away, each celebrity would deliver a quick speech before the auction began. However, when I was at last finished rushing around like a madman trying to sort out the microphone setup, backstage I discovered that the 3 gentlemen on sale had shared an after-dinner vape on Mr. Snow's electronic cannabis pen. And so the speeches had to be cancelled. Rory made the bizarre case that the drug hadn't affected him in the slightest, because he walks up to 15 miles per day chatting to London voters. The other 2, visibly ashamed of themselves, apologised in soporific drones. This bump in the road left me with the burden of single-handedly introducing the slave auction and telling the guests about the amazing work the charity has been doing as of late, as well as thanking our fantastic Libyan hosts for a delicious feast. Jon Snow was the first celebrity up for bidding. He moved coolly across the stage and struck 1 or 2 flirtatious glances towards some of the ladies seated in the front rows. The wonderful Channel 4 news team took him home for £1,250. Tariq Ali then really showed them how it's done. He pranced strong-footedly across the stage, maintaining a proud and upright posture, and stroking his long, silky white moustache with cautious romanticism. His dazzling emerald eyes, like a peacock's tail, attracting many bidders, who threw their arms into the air with exalted lust. He went to the wealthy heiress of a tobacco fortune, who outbid the competition at £1,800. Rory Stewart strut across the stage received little attention, and his seductive posing proved to be of considerably less interest than the arrival of Abu Bassam and his entourage of brutes. The entire hall fell into a hushed silence. The 12 men made their way towards their table, positioned right in front of the stage, and they managed to make a disruptive spectacle of themselves as they passed the other diners. They eventually sat down to watch Rory's attempts at attraction, without ever concluding their loud, inconsiderate conversations. Abu Bassam himself, an imposing great ox of a man, slowly walked up onto the stage, and towering above poor Mr. Stewart, he snatched from me the microphone and said into it the figure that would seal Rory's terrible fate. 10,000. The devastated expression on Rory's face contrasted sharply with the auctioneer's look of delight. "Sold for £10,000, he called out hastily as his gavel fell. Abu Bassam then grabbed Rory's bicep tightly, and with force he dragged him off the stage. Then one of his similarly menacing Emirati companions handed the auctioneer a briefcase, and the whole crowd erupted in great cheers, as Abu Bassam's generosity was praised over the speaker system, which flooded out the sound of Rory's objecting wails. The rest of his entourage then put their coats back on, as Abu Bassam pulled Rory across the floor and out of the restaurant by one leg, pelting him across his body with a camel whip to punish his disobedience. That poor man. The mortified Rory, with tears streaming from his eyes, and his torn dress shirt covered in streaks of blood, cried out for somebody to do something to stop what was happening, as he made every effort to wriggle free from Abu Bassam's iron grip. His pathetic shrieks filled all who heard it with a bitter feeling of guilt and helplessness. No one did anything to prevent Abu Bassam and his men from taking Rory Stewart away that night. I spent the next 2 weeks trying to convince the police at the station that Rory needed saving, but it soon became apparent that they were on Abu Bassam's payroll. It was down to me to rescue that poor fellow from captivity. My initial investigatory interviews with the waiting staff at Tarablus al-Gharb, the Libyan restaurant where the slave auction had been hosted, proved highly fruitful. They all despised the way that Abu Bassam treated them when he dined at their service, and were glad to comply in finding me his address, as well as providing me with some information about Abu Bassam and his entourage. This consisted mainly of culinary preferences. The chaps agreed to phone me the next time Abu Bassam ordered a delivery of food to his residence, so that I could pose as a delivery boy and spec out the place, wearing a motorcycle helmet to obscure my identity. That Friday I was telephoned by the head waiter at Tarablus al-Gharb, who told me to be present outside the restaurant at 9:30 p.m. precisely. Abu Bassam had ordered a large consortment of Libyan food, and I was to be sent with a driver to deliver the food. I showed up on time, and a cheery fellow with springy black hair and a missing tooth in his grin honked his horn and called me over through the rolled-down window of his car. He introduced himself as Hassan, and directed me into the passenger seat door with a pointing gesture I had never seen before in my life. Awfully chummy, he offered me a cigarette before I had even sat down, then drove ahead as I lit it. Hassan spoke to me in great detail about how he had once been personal physician to Colonel Gaddafi, which I simply refused to accept as anything other than the insane delusions of a frantic imagination. Hassan clearly lacked the well-mannered graces that indicate formal education. Hoping that what he might tell me about Abu Bassam would be more reliable, I began to question Hassan as he was driving. He told me that Abu Bassam had been overheard at the restaurant boasting about a new slave boy that he and his entourage had been using for their sexual gratification. Hassan began to describe the ways in which the men had been rumoured to take advantage of their new plaything, but I couldn't bear to hear what dear Rory was being subjected to at the hands of those monsters. I suppose on some level I felt responsible for organising the auction in the first place. We arrive at Abu Bassam's London pad, a townhouse on Seymour Crescent. Hassan handed me the motorcycle helmet and warned me not to spend too long snooping around or else I would arouse suspicion. He reassured me by telling me that I could return another time if need be, and that Abu Bassam and his men are constantly ordering from the restaurant. I got the bags of food from the back seats and walked up to Abu Bassam's door, dreading what I might witness and filled with adrenaline. Hassan watched eagerly from his car. I rang on the doorbell. It was Abu Bassam. I froze for a moment and handed him the food, anxious to hurry off once he handed over the cash. Partly due to the fact that Hassan appears to use his spare motorcycle helmet as an ashtray. He asked me how the couscous had been prepared. I replied swiftly, "Exactly how you like it." The time spent with Hassan on our way, as well as my telephone conversations booking the restaurants for the NGO, seemed to have refined my imitation Tripolitan accent to a T. I rushed back to the car. Processing what little information I had gathered from the machination, I breathed a sigh of relief. I noticed that Abu Bassam had been smoking a cigar from the smell on his breath. That's how close I got to him. And from there a brilliant scheme to rescue Rory from his enslavement formed in my mind. The next day, I commissioned a print shop to create some pamphlets advertising my services as a cigar merchant, alongside my contact details, and posted them in telephone boxes up and down the Edgware Road, hoping that Abu Bassam or one of his men might notice them. Next was the task of actually getting my hands on some cigars. Apart from the change kindly given to me for delivering Abu Bassam's food, I hadn't any money. Being an unsalaried volunteer at the NGO, currently paying vast sums of rent, I could hardly afford a box of fine cigars. The first place I thought to search was the saloon of my father's club, where I remember the old duffers used to puff on cigars with the frequency of Cuban revolutionaries. Recognizing me from when I was a boy, the porters at the club allowed me in, which I thought was rather sweet. I needed no assistance in locating the saloon. It was exactly where it had been for over 100 years. I was shocked when I entered the room. Not one cigar in sight. The men were vaping. I demanded an explanation. One of the chaps told me that they had all switched to electronically vaping a liquid called Havana Rush, since the smoking ban reached private clubs in 2012. Apart from Reginald, another of the decrepit gentlemen interjected, whom he told me to find on the patio outside of the emergency exit, before returning his attention back down to his electronic tablet, the light of which illuminated the old man with a salmon-pink glow. I made my way across the vapour-filled room to its back door, through which Reginald was sitting on a monoblock chair in the chilly wind, puffing away on the club's patio, the lone refuge for smokers. As he saw me approach, he said hello, and told me to fetch another monoblock chair from the stack over there and join him. After chatting for a while, I finally cut to the chase. and asked Reginald if I could borrow a box of his cigars and pay him back once my charade to rescue Rory was completed. And he was so moved by Rory's unfortunate ordeal that he gifted me a box of cigars. Reginald then went on to tell me that he had been stationed at Aden and then on to a career in the petrochemical industry, which had given him a shocking insight into how the Arabs of the Persian Gulf treated those they viewed as their human property. On my way out of the club, clutching onto the box of cigars, I received a text message that read as follows: "Bring cigars to 17 Seymour Crescent before Friday?" That was Abu Bassam's address, where Rory was being held captive. I replied, saying I would come on Thursday evening, not wanting to appear overly keen. Reginald had informed me that it was customary for a luxury cigar merchant to stay for only as long as the first cigar is being smoked. And then soon afterwards he must excuse himself. I had no solid plan to rescue Rory, or to liquidate Abu Bassam and his men. I was more hoping that the conditions for me to break Rory out of there would come into effect without my direct intervention, and that I would act more as a catalyst for his escape. This Whiggish optimism was all that held me together on that eventful eve. To make sure I looked smart, I examined my own appearance in the reflection of a window on one of the cars parked on Seymour Crescent before I approached Abu Bassam's door. I was filled with adrenaline, but managed to contain any outward signs of fidgetiness as I rang the bell. One of Abu Bassam's men answered the door, invited me in, and told me to wait in the foyer on that Barcelona chair that he pointed to with his open palm. I asked politely for a glass of water, and then he barked something into the kitchen in Arabic gruffly. Smiling, he then turned to tell me that he would come and fetch me soon, after their meeting was finished. As I waited in the foyer alone, admiring the elegant juxtaposition of the rococo and minimalist styles in that room's furniture, I began to hear a metallic rattling noise that sounded like it was getting closer. The kitchen door then opened hesitantly, with eyes fixed firmly to the floor, his feet shackled together by chains. Rory entered the room timidly, carrying on a silver tray plastic bottles of spring water. His expression, lifeless, pale and afraid. His clothes torn and dirty. He approached me. Slowly he recognized me, but with certainty. He then fell to his knees, and Rory wept uncontrollably with his head in my lap. It was emotionally raw. He eventually pulled himself together and began to describe to me the daily routine of cruelty that he experiences at the hands of Abu Bassam. He told me how those men abuse him, how he's kept on a regimen of tranquilizers against his will, how he's forbidden from having any contact whatsoever with the outside world, and beaten regularly by Abu Bassam. My heart ached for Rory. I promised that I would break him free that night, by any means at my disposal, come what might. He then thanked me with humility and called me a true friend. According to Rory, the meeting taking place was between Abu Bassam and his men, and the Israeli ambassador and his men, as part of talks between the two countries to normalise diplomatic relations. But he warned me not to be seen to be mocking Abu Bassam's guests at all, or else there would be severe consequences to follow. They apparently have no sense of humour about themselves whatsoever. Together we formulated a plan. Mine and Rory's strategy was to wait until we had all sat down to feast on the delivery being prepared by the chaps at Tarablus al-Gharb. Then, the very moment that every guest has been served his plate, I would excuse myself and make my way to the lavatory. But I would in fact be rescuing Rory from their cruel servitude, never to return to that contemptible man's dining table again. I must say it was fantastic to see Rory come back to life, while weighing out every possible threat and considering each potential outcome carefully. We wished each other luck, shook hands, and dear Rory made his way back to the kitchen, where at the threshold of that room he turned around and gave me a light-hearted military salute. As I sat on the Barcelona chair, trying to embody the role of a cigar merchant, it soon became clear that their meeting had finished. Abu Bassam's entourage and guests made their way into the lounge through the foyer, and Abu Bassam came up to me, introduced himself, and invited me to stay for dinner. A Libyan delivery was arriving soon and in plenty. Affecting a surprised tone, I accepted the invitation and walked with Abu Bassam into the lounge to meet his guests and be introduced to each one of his 11 men. A mixed bunch dressed in fine white robes. We only sat down for a few minutes before the delivery from Tarablus al-Gharb arrived. In that time, fortunately, the main work of carrying on the conversation was done by others. I managed to avoid speaking, until I alone volunteered to help bring in the food. Abu Bassam, in his over-familiar appreciation, put his arm tightly around me, and walked with me to the door, holding me by his side with ursine strength. On the other side of the door it was Hassan, carrying many bags full of Libyan takeaway. The silly bugger almost uncovered my false identity when he called out, "Hello, my friend!" Letting go of me suddenly, Abu Bassam then gave me a suspicious glare. Luckily it came to nothing. He paid Hassan and we both brought the bags of food through to the dining room table, around which everybody was seated in mouth-watering anticipation. Immediately there was an obstacle to our meticulously thought-out plan. Rather than each banqueteer being served his plate individually, and waiting until everybody had been given their food before commencing the meal, as Rory and I thought only natural, Abu Bassam commanded his guests, his entourage and myself to begin feasting all at once with our hands, directly from the foil containers that the food had arrived in. Unfortunately, we hadn't accounted for such a quagmire right off the bat, and so it would become necessary to act according to spontaneously shifting circumstances. Once they were all fully tucking into Tarablus al-Gharb's 24-person mixed grill platter and conversing amicably, I would get up and excuse myself, then fetch Rory from the kitchen and escape, never to return to that contemptible man's dining table again. I attempted to do just that, but Abu Bassam barked an order at one of his men, who then wiped his fingers and mouth before escorting me to the lavatory. As he marched me down the corridor, I considered taking him out of force. Then realising that the palatial London home was probably monitored under optical surveillance. I could sense that they were suspicious of me. I needed to forget about Rory momentarily and wait until Abu Bassam's belly was full with mutton and whiskey before any further manoeuvres could take place. I washed my hands only, and we returned to the dining room table. Everybody was listening with feigned interest to a story being told by one of Abu Bassam's companions about a recent shopping holiday to Milan, which included a box office spectatorship of the local footy match. Abu Bassam then announced that he would be flying back to the UAE that Sunday to help negotiate an important investment contract on behalf of the leader of his tribe, and that he would be bringing his new slave boy with him to keep his multitude of cousins and nephews entertained, as Abu Bassam phrased it. This suggestive phrasing caused all of his guests to laugh, and so I joined them in a sordid chuckle at poor Rory's expense. Collectively, we managed to polish off the food and consolidate our blossoming friendships with the after-dinner passage of dates. I then said something which pricked the ears of Abu Bassam. I remarked how delicious the shamoula relish had been. Feeling relaxed in my surroundings, I'd revealed a great deal of background knowledge about a quite obscure national cuisine that could have potentially linked my false persona back to my true identity, the MC at the Charity Slave Auction. I was fortunately saved by the entrance of Rory, who came in from the kitchen to clear the dining table right then. Abu Bassam's momentary feeling of suspicion quickly converted into barely contained animal lust. And who I was certainly the furthest thing from his mind. As he leered at Rory stretching to reach the foil containers that we had just devoured the food from. Abu Bassam then stood up from his chair and suggested that we all make our way to the living room area, where we would drink whiskey and sample some special cigars, which would be provided by myself, courtesy of Reginald. The whole party followed him into a room, empty except for oriental cushions lining the edges of the tiled floor. We all got down and sat on these flat cushions with our backs comfortably resting against the walls. Rory was soon there, passing around slices of melon and filling up cups of tea. When Rory finished serving the guests, Abu Bassam barked an order at two of his men, who got up and took Rory out of the room. Rory offered no resistance at all. They had shattered the sense of personal autonomy, innate in every free-born soul. Abu Bassam then directed his attention towards me, and suggested that now would be the optimal time for everybody to sample my cigars. His guests all nodded and rabbled in agreement. I said what a good idea, and began distributing cigars, until each man had one either in his hand or clenched between his lips. Then I made a phony speech saying a few words about the provenance of the cigars and something of their aromatic qualities, which the lounging men found informative. At Abu Bassam's command, we ignited our cigars. Once again I aroused suspicion. When I took my first puff, I spluttered and coughed in disgust, rather than inhaling the smoke with an intimate familiarity one ought to expect from a debonair cigar merchant, such as my role had ostensibly been. Once again I was saved by fortunate timing. One of the men who had taken Rory away returned, declaring something in Arabic to Abu Bassam, who then demanded music to be played. Another member of his entourage, using his phone remotely from the cushions, then connected to a portable device. And the other man who had taken Rory away came back and brought him into the room. Rory, with shackled feet, was dragged into the room. I had never seen anything like it. Dressed in a red sequined belly dancer's outfit, his face veiled through a translucent piece of matching cloth. His wrists decorated with jangling gold bracelets, and his whip-marked skin revealing Abu Bassam's sadistic tendencies to all. Abu Bassam began to clap, and his entourage, his guests, and I clapped along with him to the rhythm of the music. Then Rory's feet were unshackled, and slowly he began to shake his hips and move his feet in time to the music being played. Abu Bassam, savouring his cigar, was smirking with predatory desire, and all of the men seemed to tingle with delight as Rory started to perform his dance for them. Rory moved with the light-footed swiftness of a hummingbird, the heightened spatial awareness of a street cat, and the enticing charm of a beautiful woman. He was fantastic, and everybody thought so. Rory pulled up the youngest member of the Israeli delegation from his cushion to get up and dance with him. The recruited dancing partner was bashful at first, but he softened his edge, and egged on by the other men, began to move symbiotically with Rory's gyrating body. The breathless lad of 19 eventually lost his energy, but Rory kept going with vigour, dancing through the twirling clouds of smoke for almost an hour. When he finally finished, taking his parting bow, we all howled and whistled and cheered. Abu Bassam then encouraged a final round of applause from the grateful spectators, before he got up and ordered Rory to be taken away. Rory's feet were shackled together once again, and before he was taken away, he wheezingly asked if anybody in the room had any spare drugs that he could take only a small portion of. Abu Bassam spat in his face and demanded that Rory be locked away until their flight for the Emirates. What a specimen, I remarked sheepishly to try and calm the mood. At this point, most of the men were over halfway through smoking their cigars, and our host's temper was beginning to improve. Abu Bassam, jumping the gun, then told me straightforwardly that he would like to buy the box of cigars, as well as a second one of the same kind. He asked me for the price, and off the top of my head, I told him £800. He asked me to repeat myself. Then, in Arabic, he seemed to instruct one of his men to block the exit from the room and the rest to arise from the floor. The mood became very tense. £800? I said again. Abu Bassam, with his arms crossed and his expression furious, then revealed his awareness of who I was. He recognised the similarity in how I said £800 then and when I announced the sale of Tariq Ali at the auction, just as he and his entourage entered the charity garden. He accused me of trying to steal back my slave, whom he had fairly purchased, calling me a dirty cheat. I explained that I was trying to rescue Rory to liberate him, rather than selling him on to another buyer, and that he was never for sale to begin with. Abu Bassam refused to believe me, and with all of his might, struck me across my face from a standing position. His men, surrounding me, began to kick me and beat me ferociously. I screamed for help, but none came. I cried out for mercy, and none was shown. I called Hassan's name, but it was too late. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up from the ordeal, naked, disoriented, and handcuffed to the shower rail in Abu Bassam's lavatory. From across the tiles, I was faced by a whimpering Mr. Stewart, chained to the copper pipes of Abu Bassam's bidet. Rory admitted that he was able to understand what the muffled voice from the other side of the door had been discussing on the phone. One of Abu Bassam's men had called Tarablus al-Gharb and asked them to send one of their delivery boys over with 200 tablets of erectile dysfunction pills and a pot of Shamula relish for their newest slave boy. This is the end of my tale, my story. To save the opium-smoking Tory. Those who pursue a long life of glory avoid a podium next to Rory.